But one thing I would advise too is for people who are looking into FedRAMP and they're thinking, hey, let's go straight to FedRAMP High. Well, is your customer, are they willing to wait for you to attain that? And do you have the team that can be able to attain that? Because not only are there more controls, the controls that are in there that are also in moderate, most of them are upped on the specifications. So they're harder to configure for. You mentioned disastig. I was in an enclave system with it was CMS.gov, and it was Medicare, Medicaid services, and it was disastig, and it was hard to get anything to run without having some other compensating control and deviations and
why was that generally
deviations.
Is that because of like legacy technology that you're dealing with, or
yeah, a lot of it was, but it was just back to the fact when you turn things on configuration control, when you really turn down the screws, it breaks a lot of things in the application. So you got to figure out how to fix that, and if you can't fix it, you got to figure out another way to be able to meet the control that lowers the risk, and you can prove that, and you can have someone audit and sign off on it.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Paramify podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Scott. Today, we're talking to Eric Britton Adams, a seasoned cybersecurity leader. He's got over 25 years of experience. He's currently a CISO and FedRAMP expert at the Federal Cyber Defense Solutions. He specializes in helping government clients achieve compliance across various frameworks, not just FedRAMP. We're going to be talking a lot about FedRAMP today because, we love our F word. As a former CISO, he's been the former CISO at MX, at Kyriba. He's done security strategies for fintech solutions, has over 12 years doing actual FedRAMP. And so he's also a dedicated mentor, and he's shaping a lot of the future of how security is going to be done. And so I'm really happy to have you on, Eric. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kenny. Excited to see what you have to say. I have no idea what it's going to be, but it's going to be good.
Yeah. So I told Eric, we like just to make it conversational. We like to make it real. We've kind of interacted a little bit on LinkedIn, but so we'll see how this goes. And the audience typically likes this format. So here we go. So Eric, tell us a little bit about, take us way back. What got you into the career that you have today? You could even start where you grew up, right? It doesn't matter. Go as far back as you want. I'd love to hear that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. We're going to open up a can of worms here. This is kind of really the reason I got into technology. I was in technology really when I was in probably junior high school or before that, just basically programming on computers in whatever languages that was available. And this is back in the Commodore days. This is a long time ago. So
Wow.
I kind of learned how computing systems worked. We'd save our programs onto cassettes, got into things like Apple IIe, I think was the platform at the time, then IBM computers, and really enjoyed that. And so I did that through high school. And when I worked in high school, I worked on a farm. And so I learned how to do hard work. And so it was an interesting, I guess, upbringing in the work environment because I was working around livestock and cattle and working, driving tractors and doing all of these things. And so you kind of had to learn how things worked. I mean, there's kind of some safety aspects there. And so it was hard work. It was really hard work. At the end of the day, you were super tired. And so really, I think that kind of crafted a little bit of work ethic and also drive and determination to not let something very daunting seem like it's an impossible task. I guess that looking back, that drove me to be able to see something and say, okay, I think I can do this, and I'll find the right people to assist in the right parts and to be able to have a plan to execute, to be able to tackle whatever it was that needed to be fixed. So I think that it's worked out so far. I don't know if I would advise young people to go out and work on a farm. Really, not a lot of that exists right now. So if I had to do over again right now, I'd probably go right into some tech jobs. But really, there weren't a whole lot of tech jobs back then when I was in, high school, and there were starting to be some in college. But Yeah, it was very interesting. But yeah, I got to, like you said, got to be a part of FedRAMP early on. I was familiar with NIST, working with enclave systems with HP. And so that's what led me to, my customer wanted this in cloud. And so it was a DoD customer. I said, yeah, we can do this. I've seen this. I've worked on system security plans. Didn't realize how big of a project it was and got through it. And then that led me on to some CISO careers after that.
Man, so there's a lot to unpack there. So you grew up on a farm. I grew up on dairies,
Yeah,
so my,
same.
my my dad was a veterinarian, right? So I grew up in Chino, California. So it was weird because I was in SoCal, but I was in Cowtown. Right. So I
Oh,
understand a
yeah.
lot of that, like kind of working with my dad, and he was a veterinarian just working on the cattle there. So I got pretty familiar, but things like you said, it's really different now, right? That even his career is just totally different, right? If he's starting today versus now. So, and so you're saying Apple IIe, so you're going from when your mom probably like gave you, Mom, can I get on the computer, right? Can you give me time on the computer, that kind of thing, or
Oh,
were
man.
you just like super interested? Well, I
No,
remember asking at the time.
yeah, no, a lot of my friends, yeah, I was like, hey, Dad, can I get on your computer? Can I get on your Apple IIe? Can I have some time? Can I have a few floppy disks, the 5 1/4 ones back then?
Yeah.
And what I did was, before I worked on a farm, I was really an industrious kid. So I had a paper route and I mowed lawns since I was like 9 years old. So I'd save up my money and I saved up. And back then you could order things through catalogs, and sometimes they had a local store as well. And so I saved up and I bought a Commodore computer. I ended up buying the cassette thing to save your programs, and then the disk drive. That was huge. And it would, sometimes I'd copy over some programs from another disk. It'd take literally all night long, and then a lot of times it didn't work. It would fail, and so you'd have to do it again. And then I bought a printer and I figured out how all of these peripherals worked and all that, which kind of helped with going to work at HP for quite a while, learning how printers work. So yeah, it was an experience, but I think I would do the same thing over again, because back then technology was harder to build things. So learning Linux in the mid 90s, when it was hard just to get a video display to work in X on your video. I mean, it was like impossible. It'd take like 3 days of configurations to figure out how to do it. So I really learned a lot of how the base things work. So now when I see technology, I understand what's going on in the back end, which helps a lot.
Yeah. So today, like we have people that we're hiring that have like, information security degrees, right? They went straight into cyber, right? But for us, it was a little different, right? Our familiarity with cyber came from a different angle. Yours was highly technical, where you're learning the nuts and bolts of how things work. What advantages has that given you, and what advantages do you think people that are just getting into cyber today have that you didn't? So
Well, it's really the differences is having an opportunity, having someone say, look, nobody knows how to do this, so you got to do it. So it's either sink or swim. I was one of the first 4 Linux administrators internally in the entire company of over 300,000 people. Just people knew different versions of Unix, but not Linux. And so I had known that working at an internet service provider startup before then. And so I was very familiar with Linux, and they're like, hey, you over here, you do this. And the same thing with other projects. Like if you learn how to do things, then you'll get picked to do those things. That's how a lot of cybersecurity people get their jobs, is they were in IT or they were in something else and they got pulled over for audit or something. And then they got plugged in, and then they're in charge, or they're responsible for doing some duties in cybersecurity. So I would say the difference is right now, and my son just graduated with a cybersecurity degree, a 4-year degree. And so he's doing work for me. And really, I'm trying to get him placed into like, hey, you should go into a security operations center so you can see all of these details of somebody working an incident, being able to validate it's a real incident or a false positive, being understand the tooling and capabilities that it takes to hook up all of these things to get telemetry data back to understand what you're supposed to do, then work with run books and work with playbooks to figure out what you're supposed to do during an incident. So you get that experience. And I would say when I did it, I just had to learn and learn from really smart people. I was very lucky to have really smart people to learn from and ask a lot of questions. So I would say that's the difference. Is back then, we didn't have cybersecurity degrees per se. We had different IT type of degrees. That's kind of what I went in through, and business type of degree. And so most of this I learned on the job, because the technology, by the time I learned something else, it was really old. And so now it's a lot different. There's really good courses that are available. They're pretty current, although technology changes all the time. And with AI, different things throwing that in as part of some of the courses, it's a lot different. But still, that remains true, that you do have to apply these things. You've got to ask to be able to do extra projects. Like if you're getting your stuff done during the day, you should ask to say, hey, can I help you out on this project? And then you learn from these smarter people. That's really the key.
Yeah. So back then, in the very beginning, I think this is super interesting. I love this, right? So back then, you're just making systems work, making a program work. You explained how, like in the very beginning, sometimes it wouldn't even load, right? If you put a program together, right? So back then, it's like, hey, does it actually function? And that was basically everything, all of the focus. And it has been, honestly, up until recently, where we have this conscious effort to bring security at the very beginning of design. And that's
Yeah.
that's kind of that's the shift that you and I have seen, over the past couple decades. I think they've always tried to do that, but let's face it, security usually is naturally at odds with progress, right? It's usually that way, right? If I enable FIPS mode on something, no one else will see that. In fact, it might break something if you did it wrong, right? So a lot of times there's that constant clashing between, progressive building a progressive system and something that's actually secure at the same time. However,
Yeah, totally
yeah, go
right.
ahead. Yeah. So,
Well, just on things like FIPS mode, and this is why, well, take FedRAMP for an instance. If you have the luxury of being able to build side by side with an existing cloud system, you're building a SaaS for government. You have the luxury of being able to build that with no customers on. So then you can throw FIPS mode on the outer boundaries and on whatever is required to run in FIPS mode internally. And then you just turn it on and see if it breaks, and you see what breaks, and you fix it. But it's hard to do that in an already established environment. And so those are things that you end up learning, a lot of these technical things, of things you can turn on, things you can't turn, like services you can't run because you're doing these. And so, like in that context of a federal environment, you're going to have less services. You're going to have the core services that you need, but a lot of less overhead type of things that you don't really need. But that's really, learning through trial and error like that is a big advantage of learning the theoretical things, like, oh, well, here's what it is on paper. We'll just do all of these things. And back to your other point too, that's a lot of the reason that people building systems, both software engineers, DevOps, a lot of those folks that do the really hard work to build them, sometimes they've seen instances of when security departments are telling them either no, or you have to do it this way. And so there is avoidance there. They just want to build it, get it run. Obviously, they understand security very well. And so they
mhm.
understand where to input, cryptography, SSL, TLS 1.3, or whatever it is, across the wire and on disk and all of that stuff. But a lot of times they have seen from previous experience where someone has really slowed them down on a release, and that's their managers telling them, like, hey, we got to build this and show it's ready for a customer, or a proof of value, proof of concept, something like that. And so they have that driver, is like, I got to have this ready, and then security slowing us down. And so you have seen to where, all right, let's put security at the front and get the security requirements. If you can refine that really good, and you can build a general roadmap, and you've got certain builds that fit categories, and you can say, okay, for this, we need this higher level of authentication, or here's the type of authentication we need that suits this type of application. If you can do that, and I've seen a part of this where we had done this, then it saves so much time in the back end. So when you hit that security gate, there's not all that rework to do. It's a very important point. But you
Yeah.
got to be able to, you got to have security, and you got to have people building the systems on the same page to get that agreement. And it takes a while to get that trust.
Yeah, and it takes a while for, all the parties involved to really understand and get on the same page. You mentioned the encryption in transit, encryption at rest. Oftentimes when I was first introduced to it, I think I was in, college. I'm like, okay, I did that, but then I never revisited again. The certificate signing, all that stuff. I, memorized the stuff for the test, or for the CISSP or whatever. Then I like never, you get into other things that are not so focused on the technical aspects of it, because I come from, the audit background, mixed with technical, and then audit, and then technical, and it's just kind of a weird. Um, but these concepts have kind of like washed over me over time, and then I've implemented them enough times to where I understand them. But how many times do we have an auditor that says, can you show me that this is encrypted in transit, but they don't understand, and they're talking to someone who doesn't really understand the question. And then
Yeah.
you have all sorts of friction there, and then there's like a finding, and like, hey, you don't encrypt this in transit, you don't encrypt this this is not encrypted, and everybody's like, what is going on? trying to get to
Yeah.
the trying to get to the crux of what really is or isn't. It to me is like a real problem in between the different parties, right?
That's a big part
Yeah.
with the CISO, the CISO hat, is being able to make sure that other people can understand you, and also people in your department. So you try to show by example with other people. And a lot of times this is customer calls, and they're asking things like, hey, how do you do this? Or so that you get the assurance so that they'll buy the product from you. And you want to
Mhm.
be able to relate that to them. It's not smoke and mirrors. You actually go through before these conversations, and you look at things that the customer is going to need and they're going to ask about, because you've got other customers that are asking the same things typically. And so whenever you look at an audit control, you look in terms of risk, not only your own risk, but then customer data risk to any of their systems. And so that way you have a good way that you can give that answer back to the customer. You can say, look, we're not just passing audits. We're not passing SOC 1 audits, ISO 27001, FedRAMP audits, CMMC, whatever it is. We're actually doing this risk-based, and we prioritize these things. And over the calendar year, we talk about these in terms of risk with risk committees, not only cybersecurity risk, but business risk. And then also we prioritize them. So when it comes time to planning and budget season, then we're ready and we say, all right, well, here's something that we have a gap. We feel like we need to uplift this particular capability. And we need to be able to maybe hire a couple people that are trained on this so that we can cover that. And that maybe that will relate to more sales, because we might have some customers that were asking for that ended up going with a competitor because we didn't have that security capability. So it just depends. This is all framed in terms of risk that support the business objectives of being able to sell and service more customers.
hmm Yeah, the revenue enablement feature associated with security really has been, I think, the difference, right? For like our careers in security has really skyrocketed. Once it's, once with this thing called the internet that just like took off, and then you're selling the software as a service, and all those other cloud service providers, that really has changed the landscape with the supply chain, the things that we depend on. And you know just just how hard security is. It's uh it, it becomes a must have, it's not a nice to have anymore. So that's been something that has changed over time,
Yeah,
that
for
I saw.
sure.
Yeah, because
There
people
there are Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go.
Well, there are revenue opportunities as well within cybersecurity, and we don't understand this because we think a lot of times, well, this customer base or these customers are not going to pay for some of this overhead of security that we can offer, some additional type of monitoring services that are over and above, but they actually want to buy and they're willing to buy. So maybe they're going to spend 15% ARR contract value as extra onto cybersecurity, with which the salespeople love, because they're like, oh wow, I can make some commission on this extra sell that I give. But really for them, it lowers that amount of risk that they can go back and show if they're getting cybersecurity insurance, or they're going to their legal teams and they're talking about business risk in terms of dollars on the balance sheet or the statement of cash flows or whatever it might be. If it's a publicly traded company, these things are super important. They're also important to a private company too. But when you look at it in that context, you think that there's things that companies won't buy. But if you have the right customer they will buy extra security capabilities and they will spend a portion of the revenue for that. And so I've actually seen that in put in place in contracts.
Totally. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You pay for um, if you can eliminate risk and if you can increase the trust on something, it increases the value of the relationship and the contract for sure. Um, I want to double click on this. Sorry, I shouldn't. I hate that. I want to focus on this whole this whole risk-based approach that you mentioned, because it doesn't matter if you mentioned SOC 1, SOC 2. I know at MX, Swift is something that's important there, like with banks. Um, you've got NIST 800-53 and the FedRAMP profile in particular. You have DISA STIGs. All of those things are like requirements that you have to do, and you get certain familiarity with those different requirements. But talk more about that risk-based approach. What is common between Swift, for example, a cybersecurity risk for a bank, and then cybersecurity risk for a federal system? What's common, and where are the big differences? Let's talk common differences. Talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of commonalities. And so Swift security, critical security controls framework, and they have a different one for each year, and it increments. And so they add different enhancements to the controls or add new controls. And they're a lot the same. A lot of these crosswalk in the back end to other controls because you're dealing with things like cryptography, the way you handle data in a secure payment zone, different things like that. So similar to PCI in some regards. And they might have different nuances on what is important to them. But really, the way that you look at it from a risk point of view is you're on the inside and you can see the things that are pretty scary. Other people can't see those. Your security department sees the attacks that are coming in and what people are going after. And they might be going after something, hopefully, that's not really that big of a deal. But you know where the most important data lives. And so you're really protecting that. And you also understand any shortcomings that you have with security configurations, whatever it might be. And so with that knowledge, you also have a better risk knowledge too. So you're continuing to fight that battle all the time to lower the risk on those things that if they're exploited, you're going to have a big problem. And of course, you don't disclose this to other people.
All
You
right.
understand internally and you work with your team and you say, look, we know this is a problem. We're not only complying with audit, but that's where we're going to focus our energy, is really fixing this thing and making it a lot better. And then we'll be able to tell our customers or prospects or existing customers, whatever they might be, we'll give them an overview. We're not going to give them the details like, yeah, this was really terrible before. We're just going to say, well, we uplifted this because we feel it's a big risk in the industry to what you're doing. It's very important to you. And again, that's the risk-based approach that you can bring back to the customers that should help you sell your product.
Hmm. Doesn't matter what they're asking for, you're gonna get through it. Like
Right.
it's like we're protecting access to this data. We are protecting the changes to the things that touch the data. We're monitoring all of this, right? So if you start kind of from a high level, from a planning perspective, um, then that really and that's really the way to start. You don't go straight into the requirements. You start with, what am I protecting in the first place? What is it? And
Yeah, absolutely.
in cyber, it's data, in some way, shape, or form. And then you might add a privacy. You might decorate some privacy requirements on top of that. But you're saying, hey, we're protecting this data. And then as a CISO, you're saying, where are we putting this? We just kind of draw a picture. Where does this go from there? And then it's, the risk posture changes a lot if you're in GovCloud versus if it's just in a closet, it'd be somewhere in the office. So understanding that in the first place is great. And then it's a matter of the tools, right, that you're using to protect the data. And if you have a lot of experience, you tend to see some of the same themes about what tool is used for what. Uh, when is it good to use Splunk? When is it good to use Datadog? When is it good to use Elastic? All of those other different solutions. And so having someone with experience to understand that whole planning phase is really, I think, underappreciated in my experience. Is that whole, start from the top downs, high level. Don't go right into SOC 2. Don't go right into FedRAMP, but just talk broader at the very beginning. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you really pointed this out at the beginning, that data is the core. You're trying to figure out how you protect the data, and then understanding where it's moving, where it's traveling, who has access to it, and also where is it propagated, and do you have data under your control, under your company's control. Back in the when when people went to the office and you had the firewall, you had the company firewall, and people are thinking of that as like the perimeter around the building, the brick
Mhm.
building, nothing gets out of the firewall. That's where our network cables go to there, and nobody can VPN in except maybe a couple people who are network admins or something. So
Mhm.
that was the concept back then, is data that you have in your building. And so if you take that and you put it into a data flow diagram, but then you take it a step further and you say, where are we propagating this data to, and who do we give access to? Um, and so then you build data flow diagrams. But then also, I know a few years ago, things like cloud security posture management, but now more even importantly, data security posture management. Those systems are what people are really looking into heavily. And I think that's going to be one of the future capabilities that is very important, is data security posture management, because of that fact, because you have data under your control, but if you're going to do business, at some point you're going to have to share it with somebody. So how do they do it? Do they do it through APIs? Are you checking the APIs? Are you, if you have to change the tokens, do you do those? Do you have a listing of all your APIs? Do you have a catalog? Are you reusing them? Are you building new ones each time? Are you rate limiting them if you need to? Are you, whatever that you need to do? So, and it also comes down to other pieces of information that you collect about your customers that are sensitive data, and that you have to be the stewards for those. And even in systems that are not part of your production system, but any other ancillary systems that you have. So you have to have that data inventory. It's super important. And then also, lastly, access to data. I mean, even on AWS, I was at a conference earlier this year, and there's 15,000 different types of levels of access that you can have on an AWS account when you count every little single step. And so it becomes very crucial to make sure that you have access to the data properly, you are containing it properly, you're understanding where it's moving, and of course you have least privilege for only access that's needed.
Yeah.
And you're
So
and you're monitoring the whole thing like crazy.
yeah, CSPM, definitely familiar with that. Data security posture management. We have a couple clients that are doing some really cool things there. Um, I remember back in the day, in the very beginning, like installing, what is it called? Gosh, the things that Symantec created, and
Mm.
what is that, dude? I cannot remember like right now, just right this second. I'm exposing my
Well, I'm thinking
forgetfulness.
I'm thinking
The
antivirus when you're saying
Yeah,
this, but I'm not
yeah,
sure.
like what is it when it's like, hey, it catches this social security number that before it
Mm.
goes out of the email. What is that called? I
Yeah.
forget. I'm
I know what
so
you're
dumb.
talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
We so
yeah,
we had to
yeah.
deal with that in the large printer company, because people would say in chat, "Hey, I just want to buy this thing, fix my problem. Here is my credit card number." And so we would have to have routines that would be able to capture that, sanitize it, but then be able to hold certain information, because if there was a legal hold or something like that, it would have to have a pointer to it. So those systems become very intricate
Yeah,
and very complex.
yeah, and none of them ever worked really well. It's like it's just like super super hard to do
Yeah.
because like it's hard for technology to think of every way that a human can change that can change the threat vector, right? Like it's so hard to like control data. What are some of the solutions that you see to actually doing it effectively? So it never worked for me. I'm sure like it worked for other people, but it was really, really difficult, to get those solutions like exactly locked down where it was technical only. There was always some sort of training that had to go into it as well, right? The human
Yeah,
side.
there is a lot. There's a lot of training, but I've seen where people have scripted these. I've seen where then they're a service that you can buy. And so ensuring it's working properly, but also the people who are in control of this, that they're operating it properly. That's where it comes down to people, processes, and technology, having it in standard operating procedures. That's the way that we solve these problems is first understanding the problem, then making sure we had business requirements that we built a proper solution for it and not something else that wasn't going to work, and then
Yep.
tested it and then rolled it out to production, then monitored, made sure it worked correctly, and then usually replaced it with something else better after a while.
Yeah, data loss prevention. That was what that was. It was that's what it was, right? I think that's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
DLP solutions. I saw so
DLP.
many DLPs, and we got questions on that from vendors, like how do you do DLP? And I'm like, it's hard. So you just basically have to have like a least privilege. Make sure that you keep it really tight. Who has the access to what data, right? And then when you share it. Oh man, it's just a hard problem. But
I've seen DLP saved from a breach. And so it's good if you're using it right and you can have it in active and notify mode. Like, let's say somebody's downloading a whole bunch of files and send it to their
mm,
Google email address or something like that. You can have a pop up that says, hey, what are you doing? By policy, you're not supposed to be doing this. So if you're going on vacation and not taking your laptop or whatever you're doing, you need to not do that. Or you can have it on block mode where it's more restrictive and it's harder to be able to do work. So you figure out what you're doing, what the risk is, of course, because there are certain situations where, yes, you would block that. But then there's other situations if the data is not as high level, high value, if it's, something like, what are we going to have for lunch today? What's the lunch menu? Something like that.
mhm.
So it just depends on what you're doing and then understanding what works for the users. But then also there's other requirements. I saw this in global companies where there's privacy implications even to the employees that work at the company. And so you've got to be able to describe what you're going to do and make sure that it matches their privacy laws. And then once you explain it and saying, look, we're protecting also your data in addition to other customers' data, then they're good with it. You just have to make sure everybody understands what you're doing and why you're doing it and the reason and the importance, and that you don't want to lose your customers' data. It's super important. So yeah, DLP, if it's used effectively, that can be a very good technology to use.
Cool. That's awesome. Um, so you've done this for a lot of different companies of different sizes, especially in the federal government. Is there a general different approach that you have for approaching FedRAMP depending on, company size, or does it follow a similar model every time? What?
It depends what you're doing, because there's a couple different factors to consider. With federal government, there's different agencies and they have different requirements. They might have different impact levels. You might be working on, at IBM, we were working on things that were level 6, level 5 impact level in data centers. Nobody knew where in the heck it was out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm.
Some of these were mainframes, which actually they fit the cloud description. I didn't think they would at first, but so anyway, that's all I can say about that probably. But so it just depends on what you're doing, because some of these are warfighter systems. And so there's a lot of scrutiny on a lot of the controls are going to be FedRAMP high. They're going to be impact level 5, 6. People aren't going to have access to hardly anything unless they absolutely have to, even the reporting about it. So a typical cloud service provider has a lot of these, like I said, ins and outs and performance metrics and customer things that they can be able to do, where it's more of a closed system in most of the FedRAMP cloud systems. Now, there's also, so that's on the federal government side. On the cloud service provider side, it's different since NIST 853 Rev 5, because, and here's the difference, it's always been kind of the same but different, because it's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. Now Rev 5 has tables that says, what other FedRAMP capabilities are you using that are already authorized? They want to see using already authorized products, which makes sense, because you know that they have gone through and they've been audited and they've been given an ATO by an agency. They've been looked at by agency authorizing officials. And so it's good to use those products. I agree with that. And any of the others are externally leveraged ones where you have to get different agreements. Now, what that has done is, let's say that you are a service provider of some security capability. Let's say it's monitoring or it's antivirus or something for a cloud service provider that's supplying a service to the federal government. So you're that kind of third party, but you're supplying that. So those are a lot of the technologies that cloud service provider companies are going through, saying, oh man, we need to get FedRAMP compliant all of a sudden because a lot of our customers are in the space. This is why
Yeah.
they're using us as a security capability. It might
Yep.
be identity access management. It might be something else. And
Yep.
so then that's different because you are dealing with a commercial company rather than dealing straight with the federal government, providing them cloud services as a cloud service provider, providing an application or whatever it might be. You're providing that capability to that ecosystem of cloud service providers. So it's different, but you have the same requirements and controls, and you have to answer in the blank spaces how you do everything, and also understanding all the customers that are involved. And then, of course, you've got to get an agency that's going to read this and go through a 3PAO audit, third-party auditor that's certified by FedRAMP to be able to pass an audit, show you're doing continuous monitoring, have the agency read it, make sure the authorizing official says, yes, this works for us, and then continue to do that. So there's all the same requirements, but there's kind of different approaches about going into it depending who your customer is.
Okay, yeah. So I know exactly what you're
That's a
talking
lot.
about, right? Yeah, no, it's a lot. Yeah, because we just did our FedRAMP High assessment, and at the very beginning, we were really excited about some of the tools we were using, and some of the solutions we had were like, hey, we have plans to get FedRAMP High. We're like, okay, yeah, like great, yeah, when, and so we were like kind of
Mm-hmm.
planning the timing, and the answer from our 3PAL was like, that's not gonna work, right? And so
Yep.
we literally, when I was going shopping, you go to Black Hat, I'm like gonna go, I want to actually go talk to vendors finally. I actually want to find the solutions, that are work for us, right? So
Yes.
I'm gonna go talk to them. You basically had to blow away at almost all of them, right? Because
Yeah.
none of them had that, and the only other
Sure.
solution was deliver an on-prem. So to your point, a lot of people say, well, we don't need to do FedRAMP because we don't sell to the government. And that's not the case, because a lot of the times, your enterprises, the top 100, the top 500 solutions are selling, to the
Sure.
government, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're part of that ecosystem, it's either going to be an on-prem, and what we found is, if we did, a self-hosted solution at the very beginning, when because we were brand new and we did not have the money for FedRAMP, we were a bootstrap company, and we said, okay, hey, here it is. Here's the solution. It's secure. We'll make sure that we implement the STIGs. We implement CIS level 2 on these. These are containers, and we will maintain, a clean image for you always. And so that got us through for a few, but eventually we got a lot of pushback that said, hey, I don't actually want to be responsible for managing, the vulnerabilities on your image that you're giving me. And I'm like, hey, just update to the latest one. We'll fix it. But, you know, at certain point, we got a ton of pushback. And they said, no, what's your plans for FedRAMP High? And so that's where we're like, okay, fine. Where we, lost deals because we didn't have FedRAMP High, and, they didn't want the responsibility of having a vendor dependency on the issues or the POAMs that came from us. They just didn't want that without even, looking at our environment. They said, just, we're seeing a lot of that in the market right now. So definitely FedRAMP is more and more important, with CMMC. So,
Yes.
what are you seeing in terms of the future of FedRAMP?
Yeah, there's a lot of business opportunity. There's a lot of people that need it because they need that rigor that FedRAMP provides. I think it's a great program. I was involved early on. When I started, there were 10 that were cloud service provider authorized. Most of them were infrastructure as a service. We had our own at HP, and then it closed about, I don't know how long ago, probably 6 years ago, because I mean, there was other ones that were better at doing that at the
Hmm.
time. So it made business sense to do that. But I think it's a great program because it is rooted on NIST 853, which is very smart, rather than building some other type of system. A lot of times you see the controls, you're like, this is weirded, or this is worded really weird. It's
Right.
almost, and these are in the earlier versions, especially like Rev 3. So you're like, yeah, this isn't an on-prem system, but you have to kind of understand the nuances, but also the spirit of the control and figure out how you're going to answer that. You're like, okay, I know what they're talking about, and then figure that out. But one thing I would advise too is for people who are looking into FedRAMP and they're thinking, hey, let's go straight to FedRAMP High. Well, is your customer, are they willing to wait for you to attain that? And do you have the team that can be able to attain that? Because not only are there more controls, the controls that are in there that are also in moderate, most of them are upped on the specifications. So they're
Hmm.
harder to configure for. You mentioned disastig. I was in an enclave system with it was cms.gov, and it was Medicare, Medicaid services, and it was disastig, and it was hard to get anything to run without having some other compensating control and deviations and
Why was that
tracking
generally?
deviations.
Is that because of like legacy technology that you're dealing with,
Oh, yeah,
or yeah?
a lot of it was, but it was just back to the fact when you turn things on configuration control, when you really turn down the screws, it breaks a lot of things in the application. So you got to figure out how to fix that. And if you can't fix it, you got to figure out another way to be able to meet the control that lowers the risk. And you can prove that, and you can have someone audit and sign off on it. And
Yeah.
so that's those systems are really tough. And that's when it goes back to what I was saying is a lot of times you'll have just the core service running when you're running at that high baseline or that high impact level, because the customer just wants you to deliver that. They don't want these other bells and whistles. And so you'll see that it's more of a minimal system. And so when I built the first one, the first SaaS, it was static application security testing. And it was also dynamic application security testing, which I can't believe we actually got that to run, but somehow we did. And so it was interesting because it was the first security cloud solution that there was. Because when this is back, it got authorized in 2015, started working on it in 2013 after meeting with my DoD customer in 2012. They're like, hey, we want to use this cloud thing you got, but we can't. We don't have authority to operate for cloud. And that's when
Hmm.
FedRAMP started mid 2012.
Yep.
So you just offer those minimal services. You don't have all the other bells and whistles, but that's all they want anyway. And so
Hmm.
you have to manage it differently, and it's a really tight system. And so yeah, things can break. You got to figure out how to make it secure and meet things like cloud boundary controls, FIPS 199, all of that stuff, and still make the application run properly.
Yeah, it's a serious challenge for us. We had the benefit of being a very, we're new, right? Everything that we build is, infrastructure as code at the very
Yeah,
beginning. And
yeah,
our applications, we use Helm, so we use Terraform and Helm, and
yeah,
literally you could build the whole thing, so that was a serious advantage for us. All of our change management is
yes.
literally done in GitLab, right?
Yes, it's all in your repo. It's all in
Yeah.
your repo. So
It,
you look at everything, you've got the hardened images, you've got everything ready to go, and you hit the go button. You've touched it obviously before. You hit the
mhm.
go button and it deploys. And that really, so I saw one of those this summer that I was giving some assistance to. And yeah, that's really the future. That's the way to do it.
That's right. I mean, it's so exciting because for us, I believe it was August 2nd when we had the no, hey, we're not gonna tell us when you get FedRAMP High. I assume it's probably gonna be 3 years from now. Love it, but we have like a directive where we're not gonna do this. We're like, no. And I'm like, okay, we did it. And we got going. Our audit started basically a month later, um, right? Where we were, obviously got some good advice from our 3PAL. Any good 3PAL is going to give you great advice and going to be a partner with you also. And so
Totally.
it was
Agreed.
just so much faster for us because I mean, I've done FedRAMP so many times for different companies. We know the solutions that are being used, and then obviously for the FedRAMP high watermark, there's very few of those. So that, I mean, you just pick.
Yeah.
You just don't have very many for SIEM solutions. You don't have very many for EDR solutions, right? There's going to be more, and I'm excited for that. That should get easier, but it is a great if you're a small cloud service provider, I mean, there's some great solutions. What do you see that makes it a little bit easier for people to do?
Well, it depends on their level of understanding of going through FedRAMP. Like you said, you've done a whole bunch of these, so you could go to a CSP and say, okay, here's what you need to do, and give them some good advice. And it just depends, because sometimes I see companies that they'll have some folks there and they'll say, oh, I was a part of a FedRAMP team. They never really led a FedRAMP team. So then they end up kicking the can down the road, and then management's not too happy because they haven't really attained where they're supposed to be on a timeline. And you have to understand the government's super busy too. And so you really have to be ready, doing all of your preparation in advance to be able to be ready when they have times to meet. They're very backlogged on this at FedRAMP, PMO, all of those folks. I've been in the building there in GSA. Very nice people, very knowledgeable people, but they're super busy working on all these because they have to make sure that it's running right. And that's the reason. And I think for a lot of these companies, if they're going for high, if they can attain moderate first, and if they put this in the contract language saying, okay, we can service this amount of things that you're doing, and then you have the goal to be able to hit high later, that's the best way to do it. Because unless you have teams that are really very knowledgeable leading FedRAMP authorizations and maintaining a cloud service provider through doing all the plan of action milestones, continuous monitoring, all that, and at the high level, then you could go straight for high, but that's super rare. That hardly ever happens.
Yep. Yep, totally. We absolutely have the same experience, right? So when people take credit for things, oh yeah, I know FedRAMP and everything, that's really good for promotions if they've convinced the right people, and for climbing some sort of corporate ladder. Yeah, great, I've done it, but it does not work for results, right? Experience is what really, really matters. And so you don't want someone other than Tony Stark in your Iron Man suit. You want someone who knows how to use the tools, who knows what to do. If you give this challenge, and it is a serious challenge, especially if you don't understand technology, and if you don't understand security, and if you don't in particular understand FedRAMP, you're going to get a very mediocre result. And even if you do say, hey, I did it, I submitted a package and it's done, if it's wrong, that's going to set you back another year, up to another year, right? You're like, hey,
Yeah,
come
totally.
back to us when you're actually ready. So don't
Yes.
just like, oh, just fill this thing out, fill this SSP out, and just hand that over to the auditors. It's not some sort of flippant exercise that you should go through. You need to take it absolutely seriously, and you need someone like with experience, like Eric, right? That's going to help you, as kind of shepherd you through the process. Experience absolutely matters for us, and it's not even just me. I mean, I have a lot of experience with FedRAMP, but we hired a super knowledgeable VCISO to help us, and he got us through some real major tough things really fast, right? Because he knew where to go right away.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
That is the main thing, is once you've seen those, well, and a couple of nuances to that, you're really seeing a lot of things where somebody would head down a trail and they might spend half of a year or longer going down the wrong path. You can immediately see that and you can redirect them, but also knowing every one of these is different. And so once you get through the initial FedRAMP authorization and you see it working properly, you're able to keep it going, keeping it under ATO, then you understand how it works. But then your next one, you're like, oh, okay, well, this one's a little bit different. We went through all of the things that were required on paper, but now this agency wants a few other things, or the PMO might want a few other things. So that's a good thing to keep your mind open to say, okay, we understand all the requirements. It's on a Gantt chart or however you track it, post-it notes, whatever you do. But there's going to be other things that you got to be able to adapt and change and understand how to address those when they come up, because they're always different. The service capabilities are different. Therefore, you're going to have the ways that you implement controls differently. You mentioned earlier, there's some vendors available for some levels, some that are not. Maybe internally in your company, you're purchasing licenses from these. You might have to purchase licenses from some of these others and have people that understand that other technology capability to be able to run it. So you have to really be able to adapt. But the more of these that you see, the better you get at it, and the quicker you can respond, and you can accurately respond rather than going down the wrong path.
Yep. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So speaking of that, the wrong path, do you have a favorite like FedRAMP or security horror story that you can like obfuscate? Like
Oh,
that's what
yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking about.
obfuscate is the key. Oh my gosh. There's a few. There was one around 2017. This isn't a horror story. It's kind of cool, really. We were in FedRAMP audits, same company, same large company, two of them at a time, and it was these big rooms and the auditors separated by a hallway. And so we were going back and forth. We had teams, and then watching those go through, and both of them passed FedRAMP audit. It was really cool. So that was a fun story. I guess the very first one was interesting because, like I said, it was a joint authorization board, a job authorization, which now it's hard to even get accepted into the job because those
It
folks are
doesn't,
super busy. Yeah,
well, the
those
jab
people
doesn't
are.
even isn't even a thing right now
Yeah,
anymore,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So
yeah.
we had
It's
it.
too busy.
Yeah, we had one vendor that was like third in line for Jab, and we were super excited about using them. And then the Jab like, and so they we had that conversation. That they're like, "Hey, sorry, Kenny, don't know what to tell you, but yeah, this is punted out until we get a new sponsor for this." And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry." So I really wanted the tool, and it was like that was it. So
That's the
that's
best
a
way to
horror
go.
story.
It's
Yeah.
better to go through an agency anyway, because the reason is
Mm,
business wise, they have something you want to buy. And so you can write a contract with them saying, look, once we get the authorization, then you can start using it in your production. You can, but we have to get through this. So you're going to be what's called, used to be called a sponsor. Really, that means their authorizing official is going to read all of the information the FedRAMP PMO already reads and validates. The third party auditor already makes sure that you pass the audit to their criteria. But that's the best way to do it because it is more of a cooperative effort. Everybody's there to make sure that this thing is working correctly and it's working securely, but each person, each department has their own distinct area of expertise that they provide in that, and that's the separation between all of them. And so they want to make sure it's successful, but they want to make sure it's successful the right way and it meets their grading criteria along the way. And so I guess back to one of the horror stories, I know the very first one, like we met with the auditors and they're like, you're kind of not ready. And so we had to come back in about a month. I had to train a bunch of folks and do a bunch of things, went to Staples and made a bunch of copies of incident response management duties and made sure we really drilled that into everyone that was a role that had to answer to this, that had to take care of the cloud system, of how they were going to answer these audit questions, and they knew where to go on the procedures, and we got really crisp at that. And then also we took that and we rolled a lot of those processes into our commercial cloud, and so we got better not only at our FedRAMP authorized cloud but our commercial cloud also. And another thing too, the build that we had for that application, we had FedRAMP specific things like different session timeouts, different configurations. So we were able to take that FedRAMP authorized build and then use that, but turn switches on and off as needed, of course, because the FedRAMP instance is always more tightly controlled, like I said. And so we were able to take those best practices, I guess is the lesson out of this, and put those back into commercial. And then that was a selling point to our customers saying, look, we're using a FedRAMP build as a part of our commercial environment as well. And that passes a lot higher stringent security standards.
mm, yeah, I love that. We just have one, right? So we it's all the same, right? Regardless. I think that's a good approach. Um, yeah, okay, so you mentioned at the very beginning, you're like you actually love FedRAMP, and there's a few of us that actually like it in a lot of ways, right? So, what are the things that you love about it? You mentioned NIST 800-53 as a good way to build a system versus others, right? So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it covers everything. It's very comprehensive and it goes through all the different domains of security, through all the control families. Everything is accounted for, even down to business management commitment and the policies, etc. And one of my coworkers described this that ended up working at a different company that was non-FedRAMP on my team. And he said, yeah, FedRAMP at first, it's like, this is awful. There's all of these things you have to do. But then once you go through it and you fix everything, remediate everything, and you get it running operationally, running smooth, and you're monitoring it, making sure you've got things on a cadence that you have to do and take care of, once that's going, it's a well-oiled machine. That was his words, is it's a well-oiled machine because you've built the security strength within that capability, within that as a cloud service provider, and it meets higher security certification from just a regular cloud system, because it has gone through the merit of that authorization. You've had to prove it to somebody who that's their job. They are an audit firm with their name on the firm that is accredited, that's had to do that, that's had to do the authorization part. Well, not the authorization, the audit part, and then also the PMO who does a review of it, and then the agency authorizing officials. So you've had to prove that to basically 3 different entities to make sure that it meets those specifications. And so, like I said, it's a well-oiled machine. Once you get through all of those hoops that you have to do that are required, that are there for reasons of risk. That's why it's the R in there is risk. Is yeah. Once you do that, you feel like, wow, I built this nearly bulletproof system. But the reason is because it's required by the government. It needs to be this bulletproof because government systems are an attack target. And so if people can attack government systems, depending on, the level and what they think is in there, you've got to build very resilient and as bulletproof as possible systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I love that. It is a lot of the certifications, the CISSP is based on NIST 800-53. I mean, it's a comprehensive from physical security down to the actual code that you're writing, right? That, really well said. What do you think, just real quick, we got to touch on this. What do you think AI does for FedRAMP? What have you seen so far, and what are you excited about, and what do you worry about?
Well, I think it can help with FedRAMP, but I think if people rely on it too much without understanding the underlying parts that they should be able to do themselves, they could get themselves in a lot of trouble. So
Right.
you could do things like tell, hey, write me a policy for configuration management or something. Well, it's going to write you something. And is that something correct? You should know the base level of reading the NIST document for configuration change management of the elements that should be in there. Now, you can have it maybe analyze something that you've done to see if there's anything missing, and then take that with a grain of salt, because you should be able to understand it on your own and then use it as assistive technology. That's my thoughts. That's how I've always used it, is just to say, okay, I have an idea of how I'm going to do something. Here's how I'm going to do it. A lot of times I'll take and use a narrator on the computer and I'll talk into it and I'll build this big thing, and the grammar's terrible. It's obviously just really bad. And then I'll have AI be able to make a side by side and look at it and think, okay, there's something. Yeah, I missed that. I didn't think about it. I'm a human. And so I
Mhm.
didn't think about here's a piece I missed. So then I'm going to take that same concept, but I'm going to use my own language, my own experiences. That's where people are different from AI. They have something where they search and they find everything. They make their own deductions about it, and then they put it into there based on their own reasoning that they have as a reasoning engine. Where humans have experiences, and so they learn things. And my experience and your experience are going to be different because we've observed things at different times in different places with different people. And so our versions of FedRAMP, they'll kind of be the same, but those experiences were a lot different. And then we have also human emotion that goes along with it, which can skew our results a little bit also. And so I think really AI is good at assistive technology rather than pure artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Man, Eric, this has been so awesome. I have one more question. I think that you'd be good to answer this. When you're hiring a CISO, um, are there certain things that you're looking for? Is there a litmus test that you might have? They need these few things, right? What are the things that you're looking for if you're hiring security? From your son, right, as a SOC analyst to uh, a leadership role in security, what are the things that you're looking for? You
Yeah,
know,
one of the things that I've seen that people list is, have you been through a breach? Do you have that experience? Even if it's big or small, non-disclosed. I would say I look for a well-rounded person who understands, yeah, not only incident response, understanding how to take care of systems, how to also talk to prospective customers. If you're talking CISO to CISO, you have to understand in a business language, or even CISO to other C-suite. And that could be customers, C-suite, or your own, because you've really got to really think really hard. How do I tell people in a non-technical manner something they're going to understand in a business context, in maybe dollars and cents. And so I think that that's one of the biggest parts to it.
Yeah. Well, looks like we're out of time right there. Eric, where do we find out more about you, and where can our audience connect with you?
Yeah, my LinkedIn's up there. It's LinkedIn/n/eadams2, and federalcyberdefense.com is our website. We have folks that do different projects on our team, and yeah, that's probably how you can find me. If you're interested in something, shoot me a message.
Thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. I appreciate you, man. Talk to you
All right,
soon. All right.
thanks. See you. All
Ciao.
right, bye.